All right. Back here with Mr. Adam Fitzgerald for part 2, part 3, part 4, however many parts we go, we're going to go. So we were,
as long as you want, Tommy.
hey man, we can do this for a while then.
Yeah, you actually could. I have just to give you a little heads up too. I'm working on an idea for a book. So I wrote a timeline like of events of what lead up to 9/11.
Mhm.
And there's so many entries that I put in. So I've been working on it for like 2 months and a half. And I have probably about 340 entries right now.
Jeez.
Yeah, it's like, oh my goodness. How can I condense this into a book? And what time, what year could I start? And probably 1979 right now, it seems that was the precipice for radical fundamentalism.
Yeah.
The rise of it anyway.
Right. Yeah, that's where we had started, and we ran through 1993, but so much stuff happens. I mean, like if you just kind of scale back and you look at all the different events that happened between 1979 and 1993, you have Iran Contra and all of these things going on that, I mean, there was even prior to that, I mean, I'm starting to think of like, the founding of Israel, and the what was the bombing on the ship, the USS Liberty?
USS Cole.
Okay. And then yeah, so you had all of these things that were occurring, that were happening all over the place.
Right.
And it's just there were so many elements. If you look at how the CIA operated back in those days, and obviously I don't have any evidence that they stopped operating that way. Just kind of all I know is what they'll release, and they don't release that much, but they release enough to where you can get some kind of footprint on the way they interacted with the world. Whether it was what was the name of the oil company before it was BP? It was the Arab British.
Aramco.
Is that what it was before it was BP? And that was what led to the the coup in Iran back in the 50s. And I mean, all these things, all these things were taking place for so long that it's overwhelming in a lot of ways, because you can see how corporations interacted and how the governments interacted, and all of these different interactions kind of moved the needle one step at a time.
Yeah, very much so. It used to be called the Anglo-Persian Oil Company.
There you go, Persian. I for some reason I wanted to say Arab, but yeah,
I had to cheat and look that up. BP.
That's okay.
I can't take credit. So, yeah, no. It's interesting, Tommy, is that in terms of like you bring up information how very little there is. This is something I just had a conversation with regarding the Jackman brothers when they interviewed me about the lack of information, that there's a war on two fronts, a lack of for information by the federal government and a lack of disinformation by the fringe outlets of the populace. And at the same time, there are like bits of information relating to, say, 9/11, World War II, JFK, whatever assassination took place. And then you can actually put the pieces together. You're not going to get the whole picture, but you can actually if you get enough pieces, you can actually gauge what the picture looks like. So you can know certain things, but the worst thing you could do is basically believe something. I've said this ad nauseum about the notion of belief, which leads to the stagnation of progress. What we want to do is we want to know something, because with knowledge, you can actually act on it and act responsibly with it, but it'll be up to the individual to act on it, or else it's just, a waste of resources, avenues that will basically allow for perpetrators to basically get away with a crime.
Right.
I think with 9/11, there is certain information that we do have that we can say, hey, wait a minute, the CIA, for example, intentionally withheld information from the FBI, that there were Israeli and Saudi intelligence operatives that were monitoring these people years prior to the events of September 11, 2001. Now, what do they know? Now, what do we know, like specifics? What did they know? What did they collect? Well, that's what we're fighting for. Release of information from declassification at the National Archives, and also declassification by the federal government. In other words, good luck, right? I mean,
Right.
all right,
You'll get
exactly.
it in 50 years.
Yeah, you'll when they're everyone's good and dead, right? So, yeah, that's the problem. But that's exactly a good
Well,
fight.
and you even look at the Kennedy assassination. Everybody's good and dead now. Like, and they still won't release all the information, right? They fought Trump tooth and nail to make sure he didn't declassify the remaining documents of the Kennedy assassination. It's like, why? What are you hiding? Everybody's dead. What are we going to do? We can't hang George W. Bush anymore. He's gone. Bye. It's over, but but one of the things I kind of got turned on to by watching all these documentaries of the CIA from back in the day is I got interested in the people. And so I started reading on the Dulles brothers or James Jesus Angleton or what's the guy's name? Sidney Gottlieb. Yeah. So I started reading their biographies. Like Stephen, I think his name's Stephen. I think it's Stephen Kinzer wrote a really good book called Poisoner in Chief about Sidney Gottlieb.
Oh, yes, I've heard this.
Great book. Book. I got up there somewhere. It's there. And there's a biography about James Jesus Angleton called The Ghost. And you want to talk about an interesting guy. Like one of the most interesting guys I've ever read about. I'm like, what? He was a poet and he was this and it was like, it was just such an interesting book, such an interesting read. But you kind of get into the mindset. These are the types of people that they were recruiting for the CIA at its start and when it began, and what these people were working on and dealing with and how they were operating and how they instilled this the function to where it was compartmentalized. And like Alan Dulles, though he was over James Jesus Angleton, didn't have a clue what James Jesus Angleton was actually doing. He was like, I want you to solve this problem. Go do what you got to do to solve this problem. And James Jesus Angleton would kind of go do his thing. Or Sidney Gottlieb would be given instructions to solve a particular issue when it came to chemical composition and mixing different chemicals and medicines and drugs and all this. And he would be set free to kind of experiment however he wanted to experiment. So this is how you ended up with programs like MK Ultra, Operation Mockingbird, all these, because it was that compartmentalization. The people at the top knew they didn't want to know how these people were figuring out what they were figuring out.
Yeah, and that leads into the current epic in time currently from those effects of these operations. And the CIA seemingly has these tentacles that go back decades. The effects of James Jesus Angleton to Richard Helms.
Helms was one I forgot to mention. Yeah, very interesting guy.
Remarkable. Some of these directors, by the way, are just fascinating minds to look into. And also, to the current, Stansfield Turner, for example, George Tenet. And so when you look at some of these people and how far-reaching their influence was, it's astonishing to think that they changed the course of history for, I don't know how many countries, it seems, probably well over 50 to 60. And most of everything that they've done was probably for the worst of humanity, not for the betterment. And that leads into the current paradigm that we see today. And, when we talk about 9/11 and we talk about the lead up to 9/11 that we're talking about today, the CIA plays a role, and it's a major role. But unlike with JFK or with the assassination of RFK, and maybe all the way even into Vietnam, with 9/11, you had a lot of foreign influence as well. And this is what really was kept secret. I mean, at least with the congressional inquiries, we put the NSA, the CIA, and the FBI on the stand, so to speak, and they were, investigated and interviewed by people from not just the 9/11 Commission, but the Joint House Inquiry. And then you have, the Senate Select Committee hearings that happened in 2002, 2003, 2004. Now, did any justice come from this? Of course not. These committees are basically for show, so to speak, but not everything is revealed. So in other words, it's not a total sham. It's a partial sham, but most of it is incomplete. That's why I tell people, I beg people, it's easy to dismiss the 9/11 Commission final report and say all of it's a lie. It's not. It's a lot of it is factual. Some of it is false, but most of the information was not directed in this book. So that means it was an incomplete report. And that's something you won't ever hear from people on the media side or on the debunking side, the truther side, because they play, for them it's theater. It's pick a side and then it's a fight. No, what they should be doing is getting rid of these divisive walls and act as a singular unit, because the one thing we could agree on is that, hey, we haven't been really told the truth about 9/11, and we haven't. And that's the one common bond that we have together. And I always assimilated or familiarize it with the libertarian community. Like they'll basically fight over the most miniature arguments of all, but the one thing they could get behind is the Ron Paul precepts of anti-war. And who wouldn't want to get behind that, right? Unless you're a sociopath. But yeah, I think with 9/11, Tommy, there can be a story that can be told, partial, but it can be told.
Yeah, well, I mean, they were, what do you call it? You were lying by negation, by leaving out facts, by not telling a story. And that's what you got to deal with all of this stuff, right? I mean, it's like people act like they know the whole story behind like something like MK Ultra, but really all we know is the only reason we know about MK Ultra and the only files that were ever found on it was financing. Okay. And then we had some people tell some stories about, prostitutes in a hotel room. Okay. And some LSD and a scientist getting thrown out of a window. Okay. Like we have these bits and pieces and we kind of understand, we know like names like Dr. Ewan Cameron and people like this, but all right, so what does this tell us? I mean, I did a full episode on Dr. Cameron, and just talking about the stuff he did up in Canada, but it was all part of he was financed by the MK Ultra experiment, right? And that's how we know who he is. And, there was a documentary that came out about him and I was like, hey, I want to talk about the guy because hey, we need to know what these people were up to.
Right.
And when you talk about like these foreign assets, right? A lot of people don't understand that when you're talking in about the CIA, if the person's not an American and they're not initiated into the agency, they are just an asset. They're not an officer. They don't know the ins and outs. And as I was talking about with like Alan Dulles giving out plans to Sidney Gottlieb or James Jesus Angleton, he only knew what he wanted them to accomplish. He didn't know how they were accomplishing it. And this is how you ended up with things like the infiltration of the CIA working with an asset in Nicaragua who was selling cocaine to Rick Ross in LA, who was cooking it up, turning it into crack. And they were able to trace this whole thing back to the CIA, right? It was all this, everybody's heard of was it Mesa, Arkansas, I believe
Mesa,
it was.
Arkansas, right? Yeah, Clinton.
Yeah, yeah. Everybody's heard about like this operation of cocaine coming in through there. People have heard of like Barry Seal and these people that have admitted to doing these things. But what they don't understand is the compartmentalization of the process.
Right.
And so just because, let's say, George W. Bush was the head of the CIA and he gave somebody an objective to accomplish, doesn't mean he knows how they got that money to Nicaragua. You know,
Right.
like
Exactly.
he doesn't, like, it's just like, here's funding, do what you got to do, get this done. We need this done. And this is where the black money comes in. And this is why they were actually selling drugs, is so they could get a hold of funding so that they could fund all of these operations that they were trying to institute. It doesn't mean that the guy at the head of it isn't responsible. It just means he may not have any like direct knowledge of exactly how they are doing what they are doing.
Right. And I think when it comes back to the topic that we're talking about, like the lead up to 9/11, we do have certain pieces that are basically public knowledge now. But at the same time, these are not instances reported by, say, the legacy media, or they're often forgotten for the more, catchier slogans and memes of the fringe elements of the truth movement, for example. And so instances like, say, Bajinka plot, to an extent, which was the actual idea for the planes operation used by 9/11. Millennium plot, which was basically the precursor to having operatives come inside the United States and conduct operations inside the United States. You know, these are historical periods in time that are basically known for the public record. They're known, but they're basically ignored, whether on purpose or not. I'll leave that up to the public, but it's basically forgotten about because people either just can't grasp the idea that certain demographic of the world couldn't partake in such elaborate schemes, or that the government doesn't want you to know about these things because they're pointing you in a direction that they don't want you to look at. And what I'm trying to say is that, with 9/11, we were told by the federal government under the Bush administration that the reason why they attacked us was because they hated our freedoms. They hated that women wore short skirts and that we were a Christian society with secularists living among us. And when you look at the real reason why, and that's coming from the people's own words, the people, the perpetrators of these hijackings, they made modern video wills. I uploaded 9 of them on my Odyssey channel. I'm not allowed to do it on YouTube because they consider it a terrorism promotion. I got a strike once for posting one, but they're telling you the real reason why they're attacking us, because we have a terrible foreign policy that is influenced by two main countries, and that is Saudi Arabia and Israel. And if we actually had the public, a real educated public, to basically, stop looking at sports and entertainment for, 90% of the time and start looking at the things that matter and give it the respect and the attention it deserves, we may want to change that outlook on, how we treat other people because of these very influential lobbies that persuade our Congress from the left and right. And I think that's the reason why we're not allowed to know the real history behind a lot of these events, because we'll have to pay attention and correct the issues.
Yeah. Okay. So I went on a rant about compartmentalization. So that's one of my checkoffs. I checked it off because I did want to touch on that starting up here. Let's back up a little bit to where we were though at the end of last episode.
Sure.
We had just gotten done. We were just talking about the 1993 bombing, and this name keeps popping up. that's suspected to be involved with the 1993 World Trade Center, or is involved with the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, and that's Ramsey Yousef. This is a name that Americans became fairly familiar with. Like I maybe only because I follow Scott Horton, but I remember hearing his name a lot. So, so let's talk about Ramsey Yousef and how his role from 1993 to 2001 was important.
Well, remember he was arrested in 1995. I'm sorry, yes, he was actually arrested in 1995. So we could talk about 93 to 95, what he's done since then. But I think from the last time we were talking about, he actually flees the country after he builds the bomb. And what the first thing he does, he actually goes to Pakistan and then meets with an associate from his Afghan training days named Abdul Hakim Murad. And he's a very central figure in the mid 1990s that's often forgotten about. And one of the first things they did was they got in contact with a Pakistan militant group by the name of the Sifa-e-Sahaba, which is an offshoot of the Deobandi Sunni group called the Jamiat Ulama-e-Islami Party. And what they wanted him to do was basically assassinate the prime minister of Pakistan, Benazir Bhutto, who's a woman. And basically, Pakistan, to understand their involvement with these terrorist groups, 95% of the community is Sunni or identifies as Sunni. But they also have a very nefarious intelligence agency called the Pakistan ISI. It's one of the oldest. And the CIA actually calls it a state within a state. To this day, remarkably, there has been no reports of a Pakistan ISI agent that has ever been captured alive. And to me, that's remarkable in its own right.
Yeah, that's insane.
Yeah, it's incredible. But the Pakistan ISI also is basically used to fund or to create Islamic militant groups. One such example is the Jaish-e-Mohammed. It's alleged that the ISI helped to create that group to fight against the Indian nationalists and the intelligence services for the fight over Kashmir. And basically, they do car bombings and kidnappings and whatnot. So Ramsey Yousef was contacted by members of the Sifa-e-Sahaba, and they wanted to assassinate Benazir Bhutto by placing a bomb in a sewer drain. And according to the testimony or the interrogation of Abdul Hakim Murad that came later, Yousef built a small little makeshift bomb in a bag, and they were in a car, and they actually put it in the storm drain. But they think that someone from the gates outside Benazir Bhutto's residence saw them, so they went back to get the bomb, and it basically blew up in Yousef's face and hands. He actually survived, but if you ever look at his pictures, there's like a dead droop in his eye. It came from that. Abdul Hakim Murad had to drive him to a hospital, and he basically was there for, I think, approximately a month or so, and had to recover. Immediately upon this, Yousef actually travels to the Philippines, and this is where things really start to ramp up. And what happened was they were going to create an operation called Bajinka Plot, or Oplan Bajinka. This was a large three-phase terrorist attack with a hidden phase behind it that was not known to authorities initially. It was created by Ramsey Yousef and his uncle Khalid Sheikh Mohammed in January of 1995. And what they wanted to do initially was to conduct 3 phases of the operation. One was to assassinate Pope John Paul II, who was visiting the Philippines. 2 was to create 12 bombs hidden in Timex watches to go up 1 minute from each other on planes going to the United States and coming from the United States to Southeast Asia, and have them all blow up over the Pacific. Third phase of this plot was actually a revisitation of the first phase, because they wanted to assassinate Bill Clinton, Pope John Paul II was instituted because Clinton's security detail was too strong. Third phase, actually, which was the hidden phase, was this, that they were going to use sleeper cells inside the United States and hijack 10 planes and crash them all over the intercontinental United States. And some of the targets were the Golden Gate Bridge, the Sears Tower, the Pentagon, the White House, the Washington Monument, the World Trade Center, the FBI and CIA Langley headquarters. Abdul Hakim Murad also was to take his own plane because he was a pilot and he was trained out of the United States. He was actually a flight attendee in numerous schools, Oklahoma, Texas, Houston, Texas, and New York City, and I think North Carolina as well. He was going to hijack a plane and crash it manually into CIA headquarters. Now, this is the first time that is known to the intelligence services, foreign and domestic. When I say foreign, it's the Philippines. With domestic, it was the FBI and the CIA that basically got hold of this document from the Philippines, their interrogation of Abdul Hakim Murad that came later, of using a plane as the weapon. And this is really huge because many, many years later, you'll hear like the National Security Advisor, Condoleezza Rice, basically when she gave testimony to the 9/11 Commission report, and when she said, and I think this came from her interview with Tim Romer, don't quote me on the panelists, but I think it was him, no, I'm sorry, it was Thomas Keane, where she said to him that we had no idea that terrorists would be using planes as the weapon, because this information went to not just the FBI, CIA, but also went to the heads of state. I'm pretty sure when Director Louis Freeh of the FBI got this document from the lead Philippines investigator, Rodolfo Mendoza, that he just didn't share it. But I'll get back into that because that came a little bit later. Now, the Pachinko plot is just a tremendous plot. Ramsey Yousef, basically what he wanted to do was basically kill, I think, 15 to 20,000 people involved. This would have been 9/11 on steroids had this been successful. But to fast forward it, they basically tried out test runs. And one of the test runs actually was the first test run was actually a theater that was the Greenbelt Theater in Manila, Philippines, where Wali Amin Khan Shah, who's a Pachinko plot associate, an associate of Yousef, took this bomb that Yousef had created and put it under the theater seat. And then he went on a motorcycle that was driven by another person. And when they heard an explosion, they drove away. The next step was to put a bomb on a plane. And basically, Yousef wanted to do this himself. So to show you how crafty he was, he basically put the bomb components underneath his shoe and also into this eyeglass, like for glasses, the liquid, which was urea nitrate, put it as I think it was a glasses cleaner or something like that. Really ingenious the way he like put these components in these compartments in his shoe and into his carry-on luggage. And basically he went into the lavatory and took out the bottom sole of his shoe, which was hollowed out to fit these compartments, turned them over, and he was already wearing a Timex watch. And so he took out the Timex watch, which was empty, and basically constructed the bomb in the Timex watch. And basically the Timex watch was acting as a timer itself in its own right. And so he put it underneath the seat. Now he miscalculated here because the seat was about 3 rows back or 3 rows ahead of where the fuel tanks were underneath this plane. And it was Philippines Airlines Flight 434, which was a route from Manila to Narita, and which was a 3-legged route. It was from Manila to Narita, Japan, stopping partway to Cebu City, Philippines, before taking off for Japan. So Yousef basically built the bomb and got off on Cebu City, and then got off the plane and then headed back to the Philippines. Meanwhile, this plane was on its way to Narita, Japan, and unfortunately, there was a passenger where the bomb was, and I forgot the individual's name. I'm sorry, but I think it's Ikegami. I don't know his first name, but that was his last name, Ikegami. And the bomb went off. And what happened was some gruesome details was that when the bomb went off, because the person was sitting in the seat, the bomb made a hole underneath the plane, and the torso of this person covered the hole. But it hurt 10 passengers, just killed this man. And I think an additional like 3 other passengers were also injured in the blast. And the flight was carrying 270 something people on this plane. Incredibly, the pilots of that plane managed to land successfully. And it was pretty hard because there's few pictures that are on Google out there that shows what the damage did to the plane, and it was remarkable that they even landed it. It was amazing. However, it was a success according to Yousef because the bomb worked and it did some damage. It just so happened a freak accident of the person covering the hole with his torso upward basically didn't, implode the plane from within. And so while he went back to the Philippines, him and Abdul Hakim Murad rented a room in this hotel room, and it was called the Joseph. I'm sorry, the Dona Josefa Apartments, and they used fictitious names when they were doing it. And while they were making these bombs, and it was making 12, they had all these stoves and chemicals all in this apartment. Abdul Hakim Murad actually mixed a chemical in the sink, and basically just created this black, thick, acrid smoke that was coming out the doors and the windows. And it was in the middle of the night too. And then all this smoke was coming out, and everybody was looking, saying, this might be a fire. And Yousef and Hakim Murad were seeing all the people coming, and they ran away. They left. The police came, the fire department came. But what Yousef found out was he left his laptop in the room, and in the laptop was the operators and the financiers of the operation, and plus all the intricate details of the Pajika plot on this laptop.
Oh, shit.
So he told Murad to go back and get it. And incredulously, Murad goes back, and he goes up the stairs. And up the stairs, all the policemen and firemen, they turn around and they see this guy coming out. And Murad just stops and then just runs away. And basically everyone's chasing him. And he trips over this log, or this tree log, and they capture him. Yousef actually is seeing all this from a distance, and then he slinks away into the night and actually goes back to Pakistan to, I guess, plot more.
So you're saying Ramsey Yousef was the original Hunter Biden?
Right. The laptop that basically got away, right? But the authorities did get the laptop, and they decrypted it. What was found on the laptop was even an enormous operation, even that was added to Bajika plot. They found that one of the financiers was the brother-in-law of Osama bin Laden, Muhammad Jamal Khalifa, who actually married one of bin Laden's sisters. And basically had legitimate businesses in the Philippines that went back to the early 1990s, right, and used these fronts to basically fund groups like Abu Sayyaf, this terrorist group in the Philippines, which is an affiliate of Al Qaeda itself. Jemaah Islamiyah, which is another terrorist group that was based in Indonesia, that was doing bombings and kidnappings, and Jamal Khalifa was associated with another person there named Ridwan Isamuddin, who goes by the Nam Degwar Hambali, was giving him money through these front companies. And these front companies were getting money from businesses and mosques in the United States. It was a big network. So the Philippines basically had Murad, and they're like beating the living hell out of him because he's not telling him anything. Meanwhile, the lead investigator, he actually comes in and he has a McDonald's meal in front of him. I think it's McDonald's or Burger King. There's a soda and a hamburger. Murad has been beaten up for 3 days. And Murad looks at it and he says he's reaching it. And the Philippines lead investigator is Rodolfo Mendoza. And he puts it away. He goes, well, we got to trade. You got to tell me something. And, I'll give you this. And Murad basically says, well, I don't know. You can eat it. And Rodolfo Mendoza says, well, behind that door, we have Israeli agents that are going to deport you back to Israel, interrogate you there. And Murad knew about the nefarious torture methods of the Mossad, and he feared them. And he basically accepted the meal and then spilled the beans about the Pachinko plot and about these sleeper cells that were inside the United States, unknown to anybody. Nobody knew about these sleeper cells, allegedly. We still, for the record, we really don't know. But nevertheless, Rodolfo Mendoza, after days of taking dictation, filed up a report later on afterwards. Murad was actually handed over to the U.S. diplomatic services, who deported him back to the United States for charges of conspiring to kill Americans, which is an American crime. So the Philippines basically, he didn't commit any real crime in the Philippines. They just handed him over to the United States for prosecution. But the report went to the FBI. And according to Rodolfo Mendoza, he was horrified to learn that they were going to use weapons as the weapon and crash them into the CIA Langley, and also to a number of targets inside the United States. So they handed the report to the FBI. And according to Mendoza later on, in an interview with, I think, Associated Press in 2001, after 9/11 happened, he basically says that when he handed the report, the FBI did nothing with the information. That means when, there were stricter security measures for a temporary time, but they lifted it, and there was nothing done for immigration regarding the Saudis and all these people coming out of Pakistan, Afghanistan, the countries that have a problem with terrorism. They were not flagged. They were not screened strictly. So they were given like a fast track. And this is something that former Jeddah U.S. consular officer J. Michael Springman, who wrote Visas for Al-Qaeda, wrote. And he basically said that this was a problem during the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, when they were having this problem with Arabs coming out of the war, coming inside the United States. And that's where the cells come in.
What I understood from Springman, now I haven't read his book, but I've listened to a couple of interviews he gave on the book. So I should probably get the book and read it, just because it sounds like
very good, by the way.
Seems like it'd be an interesting book, but you can correct me if I'm wrong. But from what I understood, he was saying in the book Visas for Al-Qaeda was that he was being given orders by CIA handlers that these guys that were applying for these visas were to be approved because they were CIA assets. And every single one of them, to a T, ended up being part of the plot of 9/11. Is that accurate? Am I reading that right?
I think you're getting a little bit mixed up. So in other words, let's go back a little bit. That was the case when the Arabs were coming to the United States after the Soviet invasion. He basically was told, I don't know who told him then, but basically says, don't do any stricter security screenings with these people coming in. They're with us. In other words, they're part of Operation Cyclone, the CIA Operation Cyclone. Yeah, okay. Later on, there was a consular officer named Shana Steinger, who worked out of the Jeddah consular office, same thing as J. Michael Springman. And she fast-tracked a lot of these Arabs that would later on, that were coming out of Saudi Arabia. And I think I did a podcast on this on the Darkened Hour. I think it was 11 or 13 of the muscle hijackers that were involved in 9/11 attacks. Now, she's not CIA, but she's linked to the CIA. She's not an actual officer.
Gotcha.
But she actually was told to allow these people to come in because they were using what was called the Visa Express program, which was our way of saying to the Saudis, we're really good allies. We won't interrogate your residents or your civilians coming into the United States that want to study here for either like aeronautical engineering or electrical engineering, going to the University of Oklahoma and Oklahoma State. So they were coming in, and they weren't even security screened. In fact, a lot of these muscle hijackers who gave completely just incomplete applications. Some of them couldn't even tell you who they were meeting, where they were going, even how much money they had. And a lot of these people couldn't even read English anyway. So they gave these incomplete applications, and not only one of them was to come in for a person-to-person screening. In other words, face-to-face. So in other words, Shayna Steiger approved of all these applications and never saw them face-to-face. Now, be that as it may, whether you want to say, oh, the CIA wanted to let them in because you couldn't see them, yeah, it could be. It also gives a plausible deniability, saying, I never saw this face, whatever, who I was dealing with. And she, later on, she gave testimony. She was interviewed twice, and she was given, a pretty hard time about it. But there was no crime committed on her part. She didn't have, she didn't know about 9/11. She didn't know that. But, she basically said, oh, I didn't have help. There were hundreds of applications coming in. So that's what that was about, Tom.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. I was trying to put it together. Like, you can only get so much out of these hour-long interviews, and you're like, okay,
I know.
So I'm trying to put together, like, you're saying this, and then you're saying this, and I'm like, oh, sounds to me like you're just importing terrorists.
Right, exactly. Well, they indirect, well, unwittingly they were, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
afterwards, all right, going back to, I think, our point regarding Yousef. So, all right, Bajinka Plot is a failure, but now it's known to the intelligence services because the CIA and the FBI became aware about this operation involving airliners being used as the weapons. And remember, this is 1995 now. In 1996, in 1995, now the heat's on Ramsey Yousef because now he's involved with the 9/3 World Trade Center bombing, the assassination of Benazir Bhutto, and also, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention also, he was involved with the Imam Reza shrine bombing in 1994 in Iran, which killed a number of Shias that were praying at the shrine of Imam Reza. And it's alleged that he built the bomb that killed these people. And also, Bajinka Plot, he's involved with this. So now, like, he's the most wanted man in the world at this time. And around the same time, his uncle, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, is basically on the run from the United States Security Diplomatic Services and the FBI, because one agent out of New York named Frank Pellegrino had noticed a financial transaction, I think it was $2,500, to one of the 1993 co-conspirators, Mohammed Salameh. And this was actually to rent the Ryder truck that was used to import the bomb that Mohammed Salameh went back for the security deposit on. So Frank Pellegrino says, we got to find out who this person is, and to find, because he's directly involved with financing part of the plot. And the FBI basically didn't want no part of it. They said, we have no information about this guy. We don't know who he is. We don't know who he's linked to. And they basically said, if you're going to chase him on your own dime. And Frank Pellegrino took an officer with him. And it was alleged that in 1994, 95, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed went to Qatar and basically stood with the Foreign Ministry of Affairs there. And basically the CIA and the FBI, who were, similarly interested in the capture of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, but they weren't really interested, were bickering about which agency would take arrest. And while that was happening, the Qatar Minister of Religious Affairs basically warned Khalid Sheikh Mohammed to escape because the agencies were interested in having him deported to the United States, and he fled the country. Now, and that was in 96. It's alleged. Now, this is not speculation, actually. In 1996, 97, we don't know for how long and what year it was. It was either 96, 97, though. And it was reported by the New York Times that Khalid Sheikh Mohammed fled to Israel. Now, that's pretty interesting in its own right and huge, because here's a guy who basically wanted to kill Americans and Israelis. But the New York Times was reporting on this from Thomas Friedman, I think. And basically, where did they get this information from? Well, they got it from the Bajinka report, because according to Abdul Hakim Arad, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who is known as Mukhtar, which is a nom de guerre for him, he went by many aliases, but Mukhtar was a popular nom de guerre for him. And he didn't mention him by name, Murad, because he was quite nervous about him. And he basically said Mukhtar actually fled to Israel after Qatar, but we don't know how long, and we don't know who he met, if he met anybody at all. Well, anyway, what better place to hide than one of the countries that wants to capture you, like the fox in the hen house sort of deal.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, we around in 1996, in the summer of '96, we had a bombing called the Khobar Towers bombing, which was a housing complex near Saudi Aramco, which is the headquarters in Dhahran near King Abdulaziz Air Base. June 25th, 1996, basically a truck came in through the security apparatus and basically detonated. And according to one person who actually survived, he was in a truck and he actually got, he could clearly see the driver. And he said that the driver was smiling and he actually detonated when he did it. And according to the United States authorities, when they investigated the bombing, the bomb contained approximately 5,000 pounds of TNT. And basically, if you ever see pictures of the Khobar Towers, you'll notice a similarity between the damage in the front of the building to that of the damage of the Murrah building that was bombed. What was that? 1986, I think, 94. I forgot the year.
Oklahoma City.
Yeah,
Oklahoma City was 95.
Was it?
Yeah.
Forgive me if I don't know the year. I forgot the year.
Yeah. Oklahoma City was 95.
Yeah. 95. Okay, thank you. Yeah, but if you look at side by side pictures, it's almost like clear. It's almost like, wow, they look similar. In fact, if you took a person off the street and showed them those pictures, and said, hey, which one was the Cobra, which one was the Murrah building bombing, they would have a very hard time, deciphering which one was which. That's how closely resembling the damage was. Nevertheless, this bombing was blamed on Hezbollah, but according to signals intelligence that was captured by the NSA, it's alleged that Dr. Ayman al-Zawahiri basically congratulated bin Laden on the bombing. It's also alleged that the Israeli intelligence, Mossad, had actually had foreknowledge about the event and basically didn't tell the Americans. Now, that's disputed, but it depends on who you believe. Some parts of the independent media or the official government narrative, who basically, probably covers up either Saudi or Israeli intelligence anyway. I mean, we see, this is not a conspiracy, by the way. We saw this with 93, and we definitely saw this with 9/11. So it's not like big conspiracy to blame them. And it's also not anti-Semitic to point that out, by the way, because it's not a direct finger on saying, oh, you see the Jews. But yes, intelligence agencies do hide information. And the reason why they do hide information is because they want to capitulate on foreign policy goals. And those foreign policy goals are a detriment to certain countries that they consider enemies, and blame the governments for this, and as well as the intelligence services. So now with this happening, bin Laden creates this first fatwa in 1996 and basically declares war on the U.S. military, not on civilians. This is not, he strays away from civilians at this time. And this fatwa was concerning the U.S. military stationed in Mecca and Medina, holiest sites in all of Islam. And so he implores the Muslim community to commit terrorist attacks on them. And, Khobar Towers was one. But after that, the intelligence apparatuses are now really ramping up their operations on bin Laden. The CIA.
When was Khobar Towers? Was that 97, 98?
96, June of 96. I don't know the exact date. I think it's like June 25th or 26th. Okay. But yeah, June of 96. And around the same time, the CIA basically builds their first virtual station, which actually is called the Bin Laden Issue Station. And this was created by a CTC senior manager, David Cohn, who's head of the director of operations. And what he wanted to do was create a virtual station modeled on the agency's overseas stations, but in Washington, D.C. And the unit would fuse the intelligence community together, which was nobody, because back then you had the CIA, the FBI, the DIA, and all these agencies,
Right.
NSA, that acted independently of one another. The CIA wanted to fuse all of them into one giant station where they can freely share information with one another and get somewhere. But when they created Bin Laden Issue Station, it was the opposite of Cohen's idea, and I'll get to that in a minute. So they would fuse operations such as human intelligence, signals intercepts, overhead photography that was shot by the Defense Intelligence Agency or the CIA. And Cohen tried to run the unit, but he finally recruited somebody that was more than capable to run this unit. And his name is Michael Scheuer. He was an analyst running over at the CIA's counterterrorism extremist branch, and he was certainly the most qualified agent regarding religious fundamentalism. He actually spoke Farsi, knew Arabic as well, and was especially invested in the history of Afghanistan. So what better individual to run this unit than him? However, Scheuer's first hires were Tom Wilshire. Tom Wilshire was the deputy chief of Bin Laden Issue Station, which had a code name called Alec Station. It was codenamed after Michael Scheuer's son, Alec. So it was codenamed Alec Station. Scheuer also allowed for the hire of Alfredo M. Bukowski, who was a new hire who basically just graduated out of Quantico with other CIA officers like John Kiriakou. Jennifer Matthews was another. And basically, he allowed this woman, who, by the way, which was an enormous hire because women were seen as lesser thans in the men's counterterrorism unit. And she was given such an important position in this covert unit, which allowed for her to become unwavering loyal to Scheuer for doing it. And she was tasked to hire people in this unit. And so she hired a number of people. One of them was her graduate classmate, Jennifer Matthews. And another woman was Michelle Ann Casey. Another unusual thing about the Bin Laden Issue Station was a number of women were hired to this unit. And what this did was create like a unit within a unit. And so this unit of women basically would become unwavering loyal to Scheuer. And Scheuer, I think, knew this because he was chastised a lot for this. There was a lot of like derogatory names about this number of hires in this unit itself. But
Sawyer's Angels.
Yeah, one of them was the Manson family.
Oh, Jesus.
Yeah, one. Yeah,
I was thinking Charlie's Angels, and here we go with the Manson family.
Yeah, they were called the Manson family. So, and by the way, while we're laughing, Charlie Manson had a number of women in his group that basically,
oh yeah,
and stuff like that. Yeah, what a name, right?
Yeah.
But what this did was also create an insular unit within the CIA. In other words, they were very good at their job, collecting information from human and signals intelligence, overhead operations, taking photography around the world. And what they did was create a unit that collected so much information that a lot of this information wasn't kicked upstairs. Now, there's a unit called the fourth floor, which is basically management, bureaucrats, people that didn't want to get their hands dirty. That's the director of CIA, which is George Tenet, who was named the DCI in 1996 under the Clinton administration. And what he wanted to do is reformat the CIA, because at that time, the CIA was still in the shadows. Now, this is coming from the Church Committee hearings in 1977 that disallowed for assassinations, black operations that were conducted, exploding pens and, dart throwing umbrellas to kill diplomats,
exploding cigars and
exploding all that stuff.
Yeah,
all this interesting stuff. So the church committee said, all right, we got to stop all this, and it put a cast shadow on CIA for years. Tenet was a revisionist, and he wanted to see the CIA more out in the open to the public, and he worked, and he had to grease his hands with a number of people in Congress, and he did so successfully. He's a graduate of Georgetown. He was known as a brown noser, and also a very persuasive talker. So here's a real guy that wore the suit well, everything. But one thing Tenet was a man on the street. And a lot of longtime officers resented him And the first thing that he did was basically, and this is coming from Ray Nolashilsky's book called The Watchdogs Didn't Bark, was that the first thing that Tenet did was he basically forced out a lot of these foot soldiers in the CIA, basically hiring these new graduates out of Quantico and putting them upstairs in management to grow management, basically to, to create a unit for him, basically unwavering loyal to him. And what happened was Alex Stacey was collecting a lot of information and wasn't sharing it with the FBI or the NSA or the DIA or anybody else. And, the word got out that Scheuer was basically, a very egotistical man. He was a very narcissistic, wasn't very good looking, but he was a very short, portly man, but he was a brainiac and he was very intelligent, highly intelligent, to be quite honest with you, but he was a sociopath. And I'll get to that later. We will later. Nevertheless, the Defense Intelligence Agency created their own unit. And this unit basically was codenamed Able Danger. And Able Danger was created by General Peter Shoemaker and General Hugh Shelton. And this was a very, very covert unit. And for those who don't know much about the Defense Intelligence Agency, and there's only 2 or 3 books in the world that talked about this agency, which is 10 times bigger than the CIA, and it's the Pentagon's version of the CIA.
Yeah.
It is, nobody knows the audit on how much money they get, unlike the CIA, which we do audit. We do audit the NSA, we do audit the FBI. We don't audit the Defense Intelligence Agency.
Here's something that I think the first time they really crossed my radar on any scale that I could think of that was like, oh wait, who are these guys? Was during the Trump impeachment about Ukraine, and they were not interrogating, but they were questioning some guy in front of Congress. Can't remember who it was. It was a lieutenant colonel. He was being questioned in front of Congress, and he was the director of the DIA at the time during like 2018.
This is Iran Contra, you said?
No. During the Ukraine scandal with Trump here in 2018.
I'm sorry, I got that.
When he was being impeached for that. And this lieutenant colonel was just like, yeah, like we had Eastern European strategy in place. We didn't need his input, basically is what he's saying. Like it was already there. Like, so anything he did didn't matter anyway, because we already knew what we were going to be doing. And it was like, wow, who are these guys? I want to know who these guys are who don't even care. Like the entire history of the CIA is arguing with the president. And this guy just comes out and be like, no, we tell the president, like, we don't argue with him.
Right.
Yeah. It was just this like really arrogant kind of like matter of fact, like, no, our foreign policy with Ukraine was already set. Like, it didn't matter what Trump did.
Exactly. Yeah. And so like going back to the Bin Laden issue station, you have all these agencies that basically are trying to share information to help one another. Meanwhile, the CIA was actually hoarding information because Scheuer didn't like the FBI. And about this time in 1996, the FBI sent agents over to work with Alex Station, and running the Bin Laden unit in New York, which was also created in 96, incidentally enough, was John O'Neill. John O'Neill is a longtime FBI agent that started, I think, in the 70s in Chicago, transferred over to New York, worked white-collar crimes, became involved with the radical fundamentalist unit, and then created the Bin Laden unit in 96, 97, and recruited agents. I'm sorry, he created in 98. I'm sorry, it was 98. But he worked down in New York, and he worked with this unit called I-49. And there was a lot of legendary agents in here because they had one thing about New York FBI is that they were the most experienced regarding radical fundamentalists. And that came from experience. 1993, for example, the assassination of El Said Nosser, which is considered the first terrorist act in the United States that happened in 1990. So they have a lot of these agents like Dan Coleman, Frank Pellegrino, Jack Clunan, John Antisev, Louis Napoli, John O'Neill. A lot of legendary people. I mean, really, they even legendary to this day.
Yeah.
That worked in the radical fundamentalist unit. And John O'Neill was considered tall, handsome, wore a pinky ring like a mobster, very demure, very smooth talker, and extremely intelligent when it comes to radical fundamentalism. So, of course, you put together Scheuer, John O'Neill, and you put these personalities together, and it's an automatic clash. Also, adding fuel to this fire is that Scheuer was CIA, John O'Neill was FBI, and the history between them is not very friendly.
Right.
So a lot of this plays a part. And when John O'Neill sent agents like Mark Rossini and Doug Miller and Ed Getz and Margaret Gillespie over to work as liaisons to Alex Station, they know full well where it's coming from. It's coming from John O'Neill. And they already hated these people, Scheuer and them. And, he spread the word, Alfred Ambikowski and Michelle Ann Casey and all them. They didn't like, these hires that were coming in to work at CIA. So they didn't share information with them. And so Scheuer, who became such a petulant child regarding information, the CIA knew about this, and management was complaining, saying, hey, you know what? This guy's not sharing information. And also, too, during a lot of these principal meetings, which are basically meetings with the heads of state and the directors of the intelligence apparatuses, where they would meet into this unit in the Pentagon, and they would talk with, like, the Secretary of State, the National Security Advisor, about the burgeoning current threat levels to the United States and their interests abroad. And so they'll have this table with people like the head of the DIA, the head of the CIA, the FBI, the NSA, Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, and they would share information with one another, or they would hoard information, not share it with one another. That's a big problem too. Scheuer basically was actually advocating for the assassination of bin Laden while he was in Sudan. Now, while in Sudan, bin Laden was growing his group called Al Qaeda that I was talking about with you before in part one, and basically was, building training camps down there. And Scheuer was keeping an eye on him, and the CIA's counterterrorism center was also keeping an eye on him, collecting information about him as well. And then you had the NSA that were listening to his satellite phones while he was making phone calls. Scheuer would basically say, we need to kill him right away. He knew one thing about Scheuer. He knew that bin Laden was a bigger threat than, say, the White House did. Clinton didn't take him really seriously. Later on, it would become worse under Bush, but at least Clinton would entertain the idea. And
now,
Clinton,
was this before or after they read Saddam Hussein's romance novels?
Probably before. Oh my God, that caught me off guard. Okay, you threw a monkey wrench there. So yeah, but and by
that
the
was
way,
one of the funniest things I've ever heard in my life.
It's funny because Iraq at this time was basically coming under a lot of attack from the United States, because they actually, incidentally enough, they blamed Iraq for 1993. Incidentally, it didn't work. Yeah. They also tried to blame Iraq for the Oklahoma City bombing. And they also tried to blame Iraq for Khobar Towers. And, and this is coming from people like Lori Malroy, who's actually, I think, married to one of the Kagans or something like that. She wrote a paper later on, which was actually used by Paul Wolfowitz to endorse the invasion of Iraq later. Just a deplorable individual. Anyway, going back to the serious point of the matter, the CIA basically tried to implement assassination plots for bin Laden, which you think that, oh, really? They tried to kill bin Laden initially, and later on they let him get away. And I'll talk about that later on in other parts. Yeah, that's what actually happened. But because it was Scheuer put the pressure on the White House constantly and said, we need to kill this guy because, we need to take him seriously. These fatwas, which I could decipher from Arabic, and he's building training camps in the Sudan. And later on, in 1996, bin Laden relocated because the United States government under Clinton basically said that, we're either going to sanction your country or you can, deport bin Laden from your country. And
Right.
he was forced out. Now, bin Laden lost a lot of money in this project. He spent tens of millions in building infrastructure, legitimate businesses in the Sudan, in Khartoum, and now he had to relocate. So he went back to his country of origin, Afghanistan, and the Taliban welcomed him with open arms and basically saw. Now, remember, at the same time, the Taliban's in a fight for the country against the Northern Alliance under leader Ahmad Shah Massoud, who's also known as the Lion of Panjshir, and they're in a long war that started back in 1992. So while that's going on, they welcomed bin Laden open arms. Why? Because they could use his finances to help the Taliban to thwart against the Afghan Northern Alliance. So they basically put him under uh, put him in a house in the southern province, and they basically had him under a guard. They put the Taliban military to guard him and whatnot. Meanwhile, he's building training camps there again, and he's handing out flyers to come and join against the fight against Northern Alliance. A lot of Arabs did from neighboring countries. Now, with that in mind, you also got to keep in mind too. You had his brother-in-law, Mohammed Jamal Khalifa, in the Philippines, basically sending money from his businesses to bin Laden. And also, bin Laden was working with drug dealers through the Silk Road in Baluchistan, Pakistan, and he was getting a cut of the profits of the drug trade, which is coming from, of all places, the Helmand province, which was under Taliban control. Now, Taliban didn't see eye to eye with drugs, but they saw the potential profits which could help. So they, in other words, like the mafia, where they abhor drugs, if it was secret enough and they were getting a cut, they didn't mind it. But as soon as it came out in public, they killed you.
Let me can I stop you right here just because I want to touch on one thing about bin Laden, because you said he was the 53rd child.
I think 52nd, 53rd child.
Okay. So he had 51 or 52 other siblings.
Yes.
All right. There's always been that rumor that the Bushes were in tight with the bin Laden family.
Yeah.
So is it possible that they were in tight with some parts of the bin Laden family and not other parts? Like, were there factions going on with the bin Laden family? Like, what was happening here?
Well, the relationship between the Bush family and the bin Ladens came in 78, when James Bath, who's a millionaire out of Texas, who's friends with the Bush family, basically introduced, who is also a Texas oilman. They actually introduced George Bush Sr. to the bin Laden family. And it was, I want to be punctual here. So 1976, 77, I want to say. Don't hold me to it the same, but it was the mid 70s when James Bath met Salim bin Laden, who's the older brother of Osama bin Laden.
Okay.
And Salim bin Laden was very much a major benefactor of Mohammed the father's oil company, the Saudi bin Laden Group. And he was also considered the most influential of the business people in the bin Laden family. And he was purchasing an aircraft from James Bath. And later on, Salim bin Laden was actually introduced to the Bush family. And then that's where the relationship began between the Bush family and Salim and the bin Laden family. And Salim bin Laden, around this time, met with George W. Bush Jr., the son of George Bush Sr. George Bush Jr. wanted to build his oil company, Aramco. I'm sorry, Arbusto was the name of the company. And he didn't have many clients in it. So the bin Ladens, to Salim bin Laden, became his first major client. And so, yeah, that's how they met with the bin Laden family. Did they know about Osama bin Laden? They probably heard the name, but it's not known that they knew him like that, like friendly with them, because Osama bin Laden was considered the black sheep of the family in the 1980s. So he basically did, worked with the Mujahideen. The bin Laden family didn't. And yeah, it's a huge family. But as of right now, we can safely assure that the Bush family didn't work directly with Osama bin Laden, but certainly did work with a number of the bin Laden family.
What, and I just want to clear that up, because you'll hear every once in a while, somebody will be like, well, the George Bush Jr. after 9/11, he was trying to like get like bin Laden family members out of the United States. And it's like, okay, like that doesn't mean anything.
Right.
Like, people have shitty parts of their family that they're like,
Right. Yeah,
oh,
exactly.
what did he do? Oh no. You know,
Right.
like it's like, I don't know. I have a cousin like that. My brother is like that. It's like, oh man, come on. And so it doesn't mean that them getting the bin Laden family that was in the US during 9/11 were involved with 9/11. It just means that
Right.
they were there and this happened, and it's like, we better get you out of here before somebody comes after your ass.
Yeah,
You know,
exactly.
like, you know, because
Exactly.
this doesn't look good. Like, whether you're whether it's just guilt by association or not,
Right.
like, it doesn't look good. So like, let's get you out of here. Let's clear the deck here and
Right.
try to handle things. So that's kind of what I wanted to clear up, that there could be these factions within. Like, you're talking about, what was it? You were talking about his uncle was working with him,
Yep.
but that doesn't mean that his oldest brother, who was born 30 years prior to him, like, had anything to do with like what the hell he was doing. Like, they may not have even known that he was still alive, let alone still active.
Sure. There's going to be a lot of strange connections regarding not just the family between Bush and Bin Laden, but also the Bin Laden family and airline disasters. Now, I think I've said this before in previous, but I'll mention it again. The
Are they
father,
royal? Are they related to like European royalty by chance? Because that would just get really weird.
You got me there. I never. I'm sorry. No, yeah, I never heard that one before. But in 1967, Mohammed bin Awad bin Laden, the father and founder of the Saudi bin Laden group, actually died in an aircraft accident in 1967 while he was scouting for a potential building to be constructed. In 2 years, in fact, 10 years after Salim bin Laden had actually met the Bush family, he was taking his private plane, flying in Houston, and he actually crashed into power lines in 1988, and he died in an airline accident. I just thought I'd mention that in part because I find that to be quite remarkable and interesting.
That is interesting.
Perspective of things, when you think about what bin Laden did later.
Well, especially with his dad, because like, he was trying to build buildings, not take them down. Like, it's kind of like the inverse of his father, almost.
Right. Well, Osama bin Laden actually was very close to his father, and he was actually the closest of all family members. He was not really close with Salim bin Laden, but he respected him because he was actually a very astute businessman, and so he lost the two people that he actually looked up to. So I think that played a part as well. Nevertheless, another interesting link, and around the same time, James Bath, the Bush family, and also the bin Laden family opened up accounts into a very nefarious entity called the Banking of Credit and Commerce International. And for those who don't know, it's BCCI Bank, which has a long history of corruption, drug dealing with the Medellin drug cartels.
Are we gonna have? Yeah, I was gonna say, are we gonna have to do a Iran Contra episode?
Yeah, I'll stop right there because that can lead into a lot of different areas. So I don't want to branch out and lose the people's interest.
Let's just say Donald Trump's attorney general covered up for all these guys.
Right, exactly. Later on,
Bill Barr, that guy.
That's right. Boy, that he leaves a very distinct taste in my mouth when I.
Yeah. No doubt.
Let's go back to Alex Station, right?
Yes.
So yeah, Alex Station. All right, so
we're not quite ready to dissect Able Danger yet.
Right.
Okay,
I could say that for part 3 if you want.
Well, you had mentioned it a second ago. I was just
Do you want me to talk about it now? I mean,
No. I just want to. I'm trying to figure out where we're at on the timeline here.
oh, okay. Why don't we stop at right there on Able Danger? Because from there, I could work all the way to East Africa embassy bombings.
Well, where are we at as far as time goes? Well,
Right now, we're an hour.
Yeah, just over an hour. So you,
Yeah.
you want to stop it there?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, and then
we could do a part three. And part three, let's agree from Able Danger to the East Africa bombings.
yeah, because I want you to break down Able Danger, because you had Lieutenant Colonel what's his name?
Anthony Schaefer.
Yeah, so I want to
and Eric Kleinsmith too.
I want to give you an opportunity to like dissect Able Danger.
Sure.
And like get into detail of what it was. A lot of people want to throw that around, but they never tell you what it is and how it operated and what was going on.
Sure.
So
I'd be glad to. Sure.
Yeah, I want to give you an opportunity to do that, because I got you here, dude. So
yeah, you got it.
Yeah. All right. So we'll stop this recording here. This will be part 2, and we're just gonna keep rolling week after week, and we'll eventually,
continue as long as we can.
Eventually we will get to the plane crashes.
But it's good that we could talk about it in stages like this, and because there's a lot.
I think it's important. I think it's important for people to understand, like, there's so much more going on within the atmosphere, that it wasn't just like one day he's like Osama bin Laden woke up and said, you know what I'd like to do. Right. So, it'd be kind of cool. Like I said, it wasn't like this like college kid going, let's go bomb something, man.
Blow up something.
Yeah. Hell yeah. So yeah, let's stop it there. So plug away once again. We're gonna plug the darkened hour. What else you got going on?
Yeah, hey, if you actually Google my name, it's easier this way. It's Adam Fitzgerald 911. I come right up, all my sites. But if you want to, go to _ Adam Fitzgerald on my Twitter, and on my pinned tweet is actually all the links to the sites I have, as well as my co-researcher, who I consider my better half, Nelson Martin's DJ Throw Detonator. I actually link them in there too. I'm actually probably going to create a new pinned tweet where I can also add other people from the Libertarian Institute as well, because I gotta, they gotta be recognized for what they're doing. It's just amazing what they're doing.
Awesome, man. Awesome. Yeah. Well, I'll get your Twitter linked on there, and the darkened hour. Look at this guy. Yeah, he's like, are you gonna come to bed yet? Is it time for bed yet?
I want attention.
Yeah, no, you're talking to this guy. You're not talking to me. This was like the pain in my ass when I would record in my truck, because there was nowhere to send him to. Right. I couldn't close him out of the room. So you would hear, like, on those podcasts, I would have like this, there was this little orange bone we had, and it was a squeaky toy, and I would be squeaking it as I'm talking to the guest, and I'd throw it into the bunk so he would go get it, and he'd be laying in the bunk chewing on the squeaky toy, and you can hear it in the background of all the old podcasts.
But you know what? I'm a sucker for animals. I love them, and so I would be petting that dog like 10 hours.
Yeah, he's a big old baby. He'd let you too. He would lay there and just let you.
Yeah, he would, right?
He'd lick the skin off of you. That's about all he would do.
He's a belly rubber.
Yes, he is. But all right, man, I'm gonna stop the recording. Sure.